My name is Angelica Lopez. I'm a research scientist with Texas A&M's Natural Resources Institute. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Laredo, Texas. I currently live in San Antonio, Texas, thanks to my work here with the Institute, for which I'm very grateful because to me, this is a paradise. What I love most about the Hill Country, honestly, are the people and how this space just brings out the best in people, the landscape, all of it. So I'm very excited to be here today to share information about the land and the people of the Hill Country. Oh, wrong way. You see, I'm an Aggie. All right. So we all want to do what is within our reach to help our resources. And by helping the land and the watershed, we're actually helping all Texans. So there are two major takeaways from my presentation. The first is that here we go again. All of our resources are connected. So it's a balancing act in managing all of them, but really what we're managing for is this one Texas landscape. The second takeaway from my presentation is understanding that everything we can do now will help make a difference in the long run for our natural resources. The Hill Country is blessed with many watersheds and natural resources. So this is our common ground. This is our common ground. This is a reason we are here, for love of the land and the natural resources. So every Hill Country resident plays an important role in managing our natural resources. And thinking back to that importance of a connected landscape, one of the major challenges here in the Hill Country is land fragmentation. Land fragmentation is a breakup of private lands, working lands, into smaller farms and ranches, sometimes to non-agricultural uses or to impervious surfaces. One finding from the Texas Landowner Survey, which is conducted every 5 years and is a signature program of Texas A&M's Natural Resources Institute, is that land fragmentation is seen as a huge concern in the Hill Country, equal to that of water supply and demand. And we're currently in a drought. Another interesting finding that tells a story about land fragmentation is the Texas Land Trends program, also a signature program of the Institute. And so what this does is it shows us, it's a mapping program, how the story of land fragmentation is evolving in the Hill Country. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. But Rachel is right. There is no standard definition of smaller acreage landowners in the Hill Country. What we're finding here with land fragmentation is as the number of smaller farms and ranches increases, that's telling us that the land is being subdivided and that fragmentation is occurring. This one shows the number of acreages that are increasing and the number of farms that are increasing. To better describe why all of this is important, we have to think of our landscape as a quilt. When we're making a quilt, we attach bigger pieces to smaller pieces. But it is those smaller pieces, those smaller parcels, that connect the landscape together. And that's why this is so relevant and important that we consider smaller acreage landowners and smaller acreage lands when we're managing for our natural resources. And in managing our natural resources, all Hill Country residents are important. The Hill Country is blessed with 4 million residents. Of these, an interesting point is that 20,000 of them are landowners, and they steward 9.4 million acres of working lands here in the country. Here's some interesting new data. Again, going back to Rachel's definition, there is no definition of what a small acreage landowner is. For this presentation, I'd like to focus on those that own 50 acres or less. Here's an interesting data set. Of all the working lands that are 50 acres or less, they make up 40% of all the farms and ranches in the Hill Country, and that is 2% of all the land mass across the Hill Country. Something else we know about smaller acreage landowners. We know that they are usually older. They live on farm. They have greater than 10 years of experience. Farming is sometimes a secondary occupation, and some have served in the military. Everything that smaller acreage landowners do and landowners do in general benefits all of us. And going back to that connected landscape, thinking of ways of connecting smaller acreage landowners with resources is something to consider. Please join me in welcoming our panelists who will be able to share information about how to connect smaller acreage landowners and resources here in the Hill Country. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm so excited that we're all here really to celebrate smaller acreage lands and smaller acreage landowners and those who help smaller acreage landowners. So we're very thankful for the work that you do. So if you don't mind, please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you're connected to the Hill Country.
I'll start with me?
And we'll start, yes.
Okay, so starting with me. I moved back to Texas in 1995. Okay, is that better? It's been 20 years since I did something like this, so forgive me, guys. Back then, you could still afford acreage within commute distance of Austin, and I bought 22 acres. And I fell in love with the Hill Country. I fell in love with the wildflowers. 15 years ago, I moved to Wimberley, and I became a master naturalist. I heard about Wimberley deer. I fenced in my 5 acres, and I decided I was going to increase the biodiversity. I keep a list of what I see on my property. It's up to 158 different plant species. And the things that has amazed me is all the birds and all the other animals who have come in because I have that plant diversity. Then, remember the 2015 flood that hit Wimberley? I worked with tree folks and Trees for the Blanco on reforesting there. And that's where I learned that standing on a person's land and talking to them about their property went so much further than standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation in a darkened room and pointing to something. And that was what was the starting point for starting Helm. So thank you.
Steve, tell us a little about yourself, where you're from, and your connection to the Hill Country.
Okay, yeah. My name is Steve Janda. I grew up in rural Victoria County, graduated from high school there. Spent summers at my grandparents' farm in Shiner. It was also hot and humid there, as it was in Victoria County, but once a year our family would go camping in the Hill Country. We would go tent camping at Garner State Park, one of the popular state parks. 6 kids and 2 adults in one big tent. It was quite the camping experience. And then also one weekend a year, I was an altar boy when I was growing up, and the church would send us to altar boy camp for a weekend in Mountain Home, Texas. So this is really where I got to kind of know the Hill Country. I mean, the clear water and the trees and the rocks, and also there was something less than 100% humidity, which I made note of. And then after I graduated from college, about, I guess in 1980 or so, a good friend of mine bought some land out in Driftwood, and I went and spent some time with him, ended up just loving his piece of land, and I thought I want to do that too. I wasn't able to afford it. I was making like $30,000 back then, and so I decided to go overseas for a couple of years, and I socked away some money, and I came back, and I bought my 28 acres in Driftwood.
Awesome. Jared?
Yeah, hey everyone. Hope everyone can hear me all right. My name is Jared Schlottman. I grew up here in the Hill Country area. My folks live in between Round Rock, Cedar Park area, but grew up in the hill country really. My grandparents have a small acreage property outside of Comfort. My parents own a little piece outside of Kerrville. Did a lot of hunting growing up in Menard County and Mason County, so very familiar with the hill country. My aunt and uncle live just down the road here as well, so very, very familiar with the hill country and grew up exploring the creeks and woodlands around our house. I did my undergraduate and master's degree at Texas A&M University in wildlife and fishery science. Actually did my master's with Dr. Angelica Lopez. So finishing that, I worked for the Texas A&M Natural Resource Institute as well for about 3 years. I've moved over to the Texas Wildlife Association now. So.
Well, I'm glad we're all here in this space to be able to talk about not only small acreage lands, but small acreage landowners and connecting them to resources. Steve and actually Jared and Chris, what do you see as the most pressing challenge? Actually, Steve, forgive me. Steve, what do you see as the most pressing challenges here in the hill country for small acreage landowners?
So the biggest challenge for me was affording a piece of property in the first place. I mean, if you're middle class and you want to get a piece of the hill country, you are going to have to find some way to get the money for it. So affordability was the early challenge. My own ignorance was an early challenge as well. I mean, once I came back and once I bought the property, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. The property I bought had been overgrazed. I knew I wanted the cows off of it, and I knew I wanted wildlife on it. But how to go about doing that, I didn't know how to do it. And this was in '92 when I bought the property. And if y'all remember, the internet was not, or at least I didn't know much about the internet back then, and so everything was not really all that easy to look up. So I ended up having to kind of educate myself. That was a challenge. And then when I figured out what I wanted to do with the cows, managing the property cost money as well because I needed to put fences up. I needed a source of permanent water. When I bought the property, there was no well on it. And I guess it's still this way in Hays County, but if you are in kind of open range country and you want cows off your land, you're responsible for fencing them out. It's not your neighbor who owns the cows. So I had to get money for fencing and to figure out some way to put a permanent water source on there. I was also ignorant really of any kind of resources that would help out with that. Felt like I was on my own. And, I was working full time and trying to manage the land. So those were kind of the early challenges. Now the challenges, 30 years later, well, it's what you were talking about earlier. It's the fragmentation, also the encroaching development. I live in Driftwood, and if you'd have told me 30 years ago we'd have an 18-hole golf course, I'd have told you were crazy. There's no way 25 miles from Austin you would have this kind of development. The biggest encroachment that I'm facing right now is that I live on a very rural county road that's been a 2-lane road since I moved out there, and it's planned to turn it into a 4-lane divided highway to make it into the southern loop around Dripping Springs. And so this will not only fragment the property out there, it affects the landowners, the families, it's also going to open up more land to more development. So those are the challenges I'm facing.
Thank you for sharing that, Steve. It's really important for us to hear directly from smaller acreage landowners to be able to determine what the challenges are, what the needs are, and then be able to develop resources for them. Now, Chris and Jared, you both help connect smaller acreage landowners to resources. What do y'all see as some of the most pressing challenges landowners face? And we'll start with Jared.
Yeah, absolutely. So rolling right off of what Steve kind of mentioned, money is an issue, right? And so one of the primary challenges that we often see small acreage landowners face is reduced access to financial incentive programs. So, many landowners are looking for ways they can reduce their property taxes or access, financial assistance for land work they're already doing on their land. And so the minimum acreage requirement to receive your ag tax valuation varies by county, but it's typically somewhere between 5 and 10 acres, which means a lot of the small acreage landowners can qualify for an ag or wildlife tax valuation. So that's a positive. But accessing some of the federally funded financial assistance programs can sometimes be a little bit trickier. Many of those programs don't have minimum acreage requirements, but they're seeking a larger ecological impact than what small acreage landowners can often provide. So because of that, small acreage landowners don't have the same opportunities to access some of those financial incentive programs as larger properties, despite doing the similar type of work. And another challenge we often see is a lack of access to heavy machinery. So again, this is potentially a money thing, but a lot of larger properties have tractors, skid steers, dozers, mulchers, other sorts of equipment that make landscape level impacts possible. But many small acreage landowners don't have the capacity, the budget, or what have you to afford or to use that kind of equipment. And now there are programs out there that can help small acreage landowners to use or purchase this type of equipment at reduced prices. And there's also programs that allow neighboring landowners to pitch in together to borrow or rent equipment that can be shared amongst the properties. And so those are good opportunities. And another one is the program that I help run, is the Small Acreage Big Opportunity. It can help teach new or existing landowners how to properly use this type of equipment to make land stewardship activities on their property.
It's neat to see how your program connects landowners to resources and provides trainings and lots of other opportunities. Chris, in your work, what do you see as some of the greatest challenges small acreage landowners face, and what programs do you provide to help them?
Okay. Well, by the way, we visited Steve's property, and he's done a fabulous job on his property. The landowners we visit, they want to be good land stewards, but they're not quite sure how to do that. Erosion is probably one of the biggest concerns we hear a lot of. We hear a lot about cedar. We hear a lot about oak wilt and king ranch grass. Lots of people want to encourage wildflowers. They want to plant for pollinators. We're seeing more and more people who are either raising bees or want to raise bees, sometimes to get the wildlife exemption, sometimes because it's just the right thing to do. We hear a lot about deer and the damage they do. Problem is, you talk to somebody who's feeding deer, and it's really almost impossible to persuade them that that's probably not a good idea. We also visit a lot of properties where people say, oh, I love the wildlife, I want to attract more wildlife. And you look around and they're feeding them, but they don't have any water source. They're getting rid of all the shelter. So educating on that. And one of the issues we think we're going to hear a lot about now is about fire, because people are really scared of fire with the drought and all that. But by far the biggest challenge we face is that park-like aesthetic that we were all brought up with. So we try to start conversations around mowing and how much of your property do you really need to mow. People tend to think if they mow, they're taking care of their property. And so we need to just give them other ways that they can take care of their property without mowing everything down. And even teaching them when to mow, too, when there are areas that need to be mowed occasionally. So how does our process work? Interested landowners, they go to our website and they request a visit. And we put together a team of maybe 3 or 4 of our Hayes County Master Naturalists to go out to their property and talk to them. We spend about 2 or 3 hours. Well, wait, before we go, we have one team member who does maps of the properties, and he does a contour map. He does a map that overlays their property onto photographs that were taken in the 1950s, so we know a little bit of the history of land. He does ecosystem map, a soil map, and he recently added a watershed map and a rivers and streams map. So we go out to the property and we sort of have an idea what we're talking about. And then on the day of the visit, we walk around for about 2 or 3 hours with the person. But before we start walking, we ask the person or the people to tell us a little bit about what their vision of the property is. What do they want? Also, if they know any history of the property, they can tell us some of the history of the property. And then we take it from there. You know, it depends on the property, it depends on the landowner. The conversations go all different ways, but we never run out of things to talk about. And then along the way, we also identify native and invasive species, and we teach the landowner how to use iNaturalist so they can do that themselves. Then after the visit, we have a follow-up report we send them. It includes a plant list and lots of useful information, links to things that the Hill Country Alliance has, that other organizations have, that we have written that can help them. The one problem we face, and I'm speaking to this group because I think you can help, is a lot of the information is focused on people with more acreage. We're talking people with maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 acres. And most of the people we're talking to aren't interested in rotational grazing. They're not interested in, they're not able to do controlled burns. So we need, and they don't have a lot of money to spend either. So we need information that they can use to be good land stewards for the land that they always love it, and they love to show it off to us. Thank you.
Well, Chris, your program, the one that you're describing, is more of a grassroots program, and she's being very humble. She and a group of volunteers developed this program from scratch in Hays County. It's a Master Naturalist program. It's neat to see how your program also provides a link between landowners and resources. So Chris and Jared, what kind of impact have you seen so far with your programs? And we'll start with Chris this time.
Okay. We started planting Helm just after COVID hit. So we spent a lot of time on Zoom planning the program. Because our program involved just a few people in an outside environment, we were able to kick it off in the spring of 2021. Our target is actually 5 to 30 acres, although we've seen larger properties and we've seen smaller properties. We've actually visited 76 properties, and we have 12 we're visiting this fall so far. That represents about 1,600 acres. Interesting that we're getting requests for very, very small properties, and rather than doing those, I'm talking less than 2 acres, rather than doing those, we're working with the Hill Country chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas to try to get them to work. They're working towards starting a program for very, very small landowners. The landowners we see, they thank us profusely. So we both when we leave and when we send them the report. We also add them to an email list. We have a newsletter called the Helm Network News, so we're continually giving them more information even after we've seen them. And we've gotten some feedback. I'll give you 3 examples. We had one owner who sent us a picture of the rock berm he'd built because his rain tank was overflowing. That was when we were getting rain. We had another landowner who got a gift card for Native American seed. She asked us what she should buy for our suggestions. Well, because we've been to the property, we had a better idea of what to tell her. And then we have a bird expert on our team. She's amazing. And one of the property owners she went and visited asked her to come back to help her with her spring and fall wildlife exemption bird surveys. So clearly the landowners that we visit are becoming more conscious and taking a more active role in conservation. And we hope the landowners we visit pass that knowledge on to their neighbors and to their friends. In fact, we know they are doing this because some of our new requests come from recommendations from some of the people we visited. And remember, all this is being done by volunteers, but their enthusiasm is contagious. I'm a big fan of Doug Ptolemy. I think a lot of you are too. And you know about his homegrown national park. I think if you asked me to describe Helm in just a few words, I would say we're trying to create a homegrown Hays County National Park, one property at a time. Thank you.
That's awesome. So it's very exciting to hear, Chris, that landowners are not only looking for resources, but they're receiving help, right? And then they're using it to steward their lands. Jared, what kind of impact has your program had?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and give an overview of my program a little bit more. It's, as many of us in this room have seen, and as Angelica talked about in her presentation, land ownership in Texas is changing. We've all seen that over the past few decades. The rising population, increasing demand for land is creating more and more landowners. But average parcel size has been decreasing, right? And we noticed that through her presentation, and that leads to an increased number of small acreage landowners. So in 2020, the Small Acreage Big Opportunity, or we call it SABO program, was created through a grant from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, who wanted to seek increased involvement to this underrepresented group of small acreage landowners. And so SABO it's a joint program between the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and Texas Wildlife Association, and it serves to teach landowners about wildlife habitat management techniques and strategies. And so they're half-day, very intensive workshops that are used to teach landowners how to manage or to understand their habitat needs, and then to manage for those needs, and then also teach about cost share programs like some of the ones I already mentioned, as well as teaching landowners how to earn a wildlife tax valuation, which is something that's been growing substantially. It's another key pillar of the SABO program is combining and connecting landowners to local partners. So may that be county extension agents or local biologists, NRCS conservationists, and so on. The key there is to introduce and build that network between technical guidance biologists and our private land stewards. And so one of the pieces of the SABO program is that we try to always incorporate is hosting these workshops on small acreage properties. And the reason that's important is because we can use field demonstrations, right? May it be plant ID or wild pig trapping or even heavy machinery demonstrations. It's important for those landowners, these small acreage landowners, to be able to witness this stuff in action so that they can best steward their lands. And so some of the impacts we've seen, the program was initiated in 2020. It kind of kicked off in 2021. Workshops kind of began then, and we've seen 173 participants since 2021. And through those 173 participants, we've represented over 8,000 acres across the state. And so doing a little bit of math there, that comes out to average parcel size of about 45 acres per participant. And that's perhaps a little bit high for some regions. We hosted one of our programs out in West Texas in the Fort Davis Mountains. And out there, where average property size out there is upwards of 500 acres or more, right? So anything shy of 300 acres may be normal for small acreage landowners, right? That poll that Leah pulled up earlier, what is small acreage? It can vary. But here in the hill country, we're typically looking a little bit lower than 45 acres, really, and that can be disheartening for some folks, right? They may say, and we hear this a lot, is we can't create a big impact on our small acreage. May it be 5 acres, 10 acres, 30 acres, 100 acres, right? We can get disheartened by thinking we can't create a big impact. But individually, there may be some truth to that. But when you're starting to look at a collective, right? When you're talking about 8,000 acres is how many the Small Acreage Big Opportunity Program has touched, you're starting to see much larger landscape level impact. So I would just encourage folks who may have smaller acreage to know that you can make a difference with your size property, and you can work with your partnering and your neighboring landowners to make a much larger impact. And so if anyone has any other questions or wants to know more about the Small Acreage Big Opportunity Program, you can just Google it. Texas Wildlife Association's website should come up, and you can find more information. You can come grab me and talk to me. And if anyone's interested in joining us, we actually have our next Small Acreage Big Opportunity coming to the Shield Ranch, just 5 minutes down the road here. So if anyone is interested, that's coming up next week, next Thursday, and there are still slots open. So we welcome anyone to come join us.
Jared, connecting landowners to resources and information is very beneficial. And hearing you describe your program, I can tell that you find it very rewarding. Steve, we'd love to hear about what you've done on your property and who you worked with.
Okay, thanks. So we got 5 minutes, I know, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here. What Jared is talking about, though, gosh, I could have used that way back when, because when I bought my property, I felt like I was pretty much flying by the seat of my pants. I mean, I had the big picture, but I was on my own, basically, learning how to do this. Back in the early 90s, I believe, is when Texas legislation allowed for 1D1 to become wildlife as an alternative to the ag itself. So those guidelines that were set out by TPNW back then were a big help for me. They helped me kind of organize my thoughts, supplemental food, supplemental water, erosion control, habitat, that kind of stuff. So basically educating myself was the first step in doing stuff on my property. I did realize water was key. Water changes everything. So I saved my money for about 10 to 12 years. I put away some every year. And finally, and in cooperation with my neighbor, who did have 100 acres, so between the two of us, 128 acres, we brought a large a pond management company to come out, and they brought the heavy machinery. And this was during the drought of 2011, so both our ponds were dry. I mean, they weren't great ponds to begin with, but they were dry as bones. So we had that heavy equipment come out. They came, they dug it up, they packed it with clay. And so we end up having real ponds that have had water since then. So that permanent water on the property has been a game changer. I have a creek that runs the west side of my property from the north-south axis. So I have some wet weather water that's there, but there was nothing permanent. But this permanent pond now has, well, it's just made a huge difference. I worked with the National Resources Conservation Services back then. There was a rep out of San Marcos, Crescencio Perez, who was so knowledgeable, and he came out and helped John and me for free, help us plan the pond, help us make sure that we could do it in as cost-effective way as we could. So the NRCS was a huge help to us. After the pond was constructed, it looked like a lunar landscape down there, and so I ended up doing some grass restoration as well. And this is where this Native American seed, this thing is like an encyclopedia of knowledge for us. So we bought some grass seed from them and did some grass restoration on the property. Invasive plants, Johnson grass is the bane of my existence, but I do a lot of work in the spring and the fall getting rid of invasive plants. Johnson grass, it's an ongoing process. Malta star thistle, I have virtually eliminated from my property. KR, well, that's another story. I do selective brush management. I want a combination of cover and grass. Erosion control, whenever I'm cutting cedar branches, I lay them horizontally along the edge of the cliff to catch the water that's coming down, keep it from running off, and it builds, grass behind there. And the last thing I did was for supplemental food, I bought a platform turkey feeder from Plateau Land Management. That too was a game changer. Having, you can put 200 pounds of seed in there. It fed the turkeys, not only fed the turkeys, but the deer, the songbirds, ducks were showing up, waterfowl. So all these things contributed really to the improvement of the land.
Steve, it's obvious in listening to you talk about your property, you've put in a lot of sweat equity, a lot of investment in your land, and it's one of the reasons I think that you've been really successful, that love and commitment that you have towards your land, and the success that you've had, not only in managing your resource, but in leveraging resources. Which brings me to my last question, Steve. What impacts have you seen on your property?
So obviously with the pond and with the grass programs, there's been better water catchment because there's less runoff. And because there's better water and there's better dirt, it leads to better biodiversity. So as I was saying, I've got ducks and waterfowl on the pond. I had Bob White. I was able to manage for Bob White for several years. I haven't heard him in about 3 years now. For about 10 years, I had Bob White there too. And I think that was in direct relation to the grassland restoration that I was doing, and also keeping some of the habitat clear and less wooded. Also golden cheek warblers, I hear them every spring, and I hear them calling for 2 months. I've never seen a nest, never seen them go to a nest, but I believe that they're nesting there as well.
And you also had a bobcat.
Yeah, I mean, I think like 5 years ago, after 25 years of being there, I was sitting in the living room and, reading a book and looking out the window. What are the birds doing? A bobcat comes walking down my front porch. And so, I mean, it was just unbelievable. So I got a good picture of that. I've got some game cams up right now. We caught one side of a bobcat last year and one this year as well. But yeah.
Thank you so much. We're about out of time. Thank you so much, Chris, Steve, and Jared, for being here, for sharing information. We have a couple of minutes, though, for questions, if there are any questions from the audience for the panelists.
Hey, y'all, we've got time for one question. No pressure. Here you go.
Hi there. I just had a question. I hear from small farmers that they have a lot of issues applying for grants and gaining grant funding, whether that's through NRCS or USDA. So I just wanted to see if you had similar challenges and what advice would you give to those farmers or what resources they could have to help get some funding.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and like I said, that was the first challenge that I thought of, and we hear that all the time. Is I want to make impacts on my land, but I'm trying to access financial assistance programs, and it's challenging. The first things that we often do is recommend going to your either local NRCS agent, conservationist, your county biologist, county extension agent, and just ask them, hey, I want to do this. What are the options? And there's different programs, EQIP and GRIP and some other ones there's a plethora of alphabet names that you could go through. But go online and look up some of the options available maybe in your county or available for small acreage landowners, and just keep trying and keep fighting for it. Some properties are able to do it with small acreage properties. 25 acres are sometimes able to achieve these incentive programs. Maybe it's doing something like Steve talked about, just restoring a grassland. And what there's programs that can pay for sprays, chemical applicators to start taking out those KR blue stems, those Johnson grasses, remove the invasives first, and then start planting native seed. So just keep pushing and ask for help from your local county biologists.
That's all we have. Thank you all so much.